Hello and welcome to the video tutorial on the end of the classical period and the start of the Hellenistic period. The end of the classical period is usually taken as the year that Alexander the Great died. Okay, he died, as you can see here, then in 323 BC. And the next period of time in Greek history begins, called the Hellenistic Age, which I will explain throughout the video. This period comes to an end in 31 BC, more or less when the Romans have taken over. Okay, so control passes from the Greeks to the Romans. Okay, so hopefully you remember that near the end of the classical period, the Peloponnesian Wars took place between Athens and Sparta, and Athens became very weak. Well, not so long after this, a kingdom in the north of Greece called Macedonia decided that they wanted to control Greece, and so King Philip started to invade and attack Greece in 359 BC. He more or less conquered the majority of Greece by 338 BC, and he died shortly after. And this is where Alexander the Great comes along. He was Philip's son, and he takes over what his father began. The interesting thing about Macedonia was that they believed themselves to be more or less Greek people. They spoke Greek, and they identified with the Greek people. However, the Greeks did not respect them and thought they were barbarians or wild and uncivilized. Okay, so this is Philip of Macedonia. And before he died, after he had conquered Greece in 338 BC, he dies in 336 BC. His next plan was to conquer Persia, okay? And so when he dies and Alexander the Great takes over, he decides to do what his father had wanted to do. So this is Alexander the Great on a coin. He was very young when he came to the throne, and he's called the Great because of the amount of territory that he conquered in such a short period of time. So he becomes king of Macedon in 336 BC, and he immediately sets out to conquer Persia, which he does successfully. He even manages to conquer beyond Persia as far as the Indus River, but unfortunately he dies of a fever in Babylon in 323. Okay, although Alexander had only been 20 years old when he became the king, and he managed to conquer all this land that you can see in different colors here on the map by the age of 33, so he was very, very young, in 13 years. And so when he dies, his empire actually gets divided into three main parts because it's too big to control. And these parts are known as Hellenistic kingdoms. So you can see here the green is one kingdom called the Seleucid kingdom. The blue, the Antigonid kingdom, I can't even pronounce it, is the blue, so it's much smaller. And then the orange is the Ptolemaic kingdom around Egypt. Okay? The only way for it to be controlled was by putting a different governor in each kingdom to rule, because, Alexander had done a fantastic job at uniting all of his people, but there were big boots to fill. Well, I'm sure you're actually wondering what Hellenism is and why it's called a Hellenistic kingdom. Well, Hellenism is when people try and adapt a Greek culture, okay? Because Hellas is the Greek word for their land, for Greece. The cities in the Hellenistic kingdoms in the Hellenistic world were modeled after Greek cities, okay? They were trying to emulate them, copy them. They wanted to have the language, the culture, the art, architecture, and everything. Okay, so the most important Hellenistic city, well, one of them, but really the most important one, was Alexandria in Egypt. Okay, there are many Alexandrias because Alexander, as he conquered different territories, named many places and cities after himself as Alexandria or Alexandropolis, but the most famous one is in Egypt. Alexandria is famous for the library at Alexandria, which housed many papyrus and clay tablets from the ancient world, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and it was a center of learning. It was also famous for the lighthouse. The lighthouse at Alexandria, one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. And it's also famous for Archimedes' screw. Archimedes was a great thinker. He lived in Alexandria during the Hellenistic period, and this is one of his inventions, which was helped to transfer water. Okay, so those are pretty much the main events that took place during the Hellenistic period. However, the Romans invaded Greece and took over in 146. And finally, the Hellenistic period ends with the Roman Empire in 31 BC, which you'll see on the timeline I will do in the next slide. Okay, so drawing my timeline, I've put my straight line, my 2 arrows, because time continues in both directions. I'm going to put the time period up here, which is BC, and the title, which is Hellenistic Period. Hopefully you can see the dates. I'm starting in 400 BC and I want to end it in 50 BC, which I'll put here. So each of these sections are equal to 50-year periods, okay? I don't want to draw it in on the line because it'll be too cramped with too much detail, but each period on the timeline is equivalent to 50 years. So the next line on my timeline is 350 BC, then we have 300 BC, okay, this would be 350, 300, 250, and so on. Okay, so previous to the Hellenistic period was the invasion of Macedonia in Greece, led by Philip. So Philip was king of Macedonia in 359 BC, which is about here. He conquers, invades Greece, and dies in 336, which would be around about here, okay? It doesn't have to be precise. Then, in the year that he dies, his son, Alexander the Great, takes over. So we'll put a line here. Alexander the Great, okay? I'm going to have to write it in abbreviation because it doesn't fit. Becomes king of Macedonia, and he continues what his father does, or wanted to do, which is invade Persia. He only rules for 11 years before he dies, but he manages to make a huge empire, and he dies in 323. 323 is the year that marks the technical beginning of the Hellenistic Age, which continues until 31 BC. As I don't have it on the timeline, I put my arrow here, and I'll write 31 there. Okay, and this is the Hellenistic period. After Alexander the Great died, his kingdom was too huge to be controlled by one person, especially not by one person who doesn't have the same amount of charisma as Alexander. And so his empire got divided into 3 parts called Hellenistic kingdoms in 281. One of the 7 wonders of the world, the lighthouse of Alexandria, was built in 280, so just after the beginning of the Hellenistic period. I'm going to put lighthouse. And the library was built before that in 307. So let me put that in on the line. The very last thing I'm going to fill in is the Roman invasion and conquest of Greece in 146. So that would be around here, as my timeline is too cramped. Well, I hope you've learned a bit about what happened after the classical period, how Macedonia conquered Greece, who Alexander the Great was, and why Alexandria is important. Thank you for listening. Good luck studying.